The Security Dilemma and the Pacific War, a tragic clash. Both nations saw themselves as acting defensively. Japan believed it was defending its national existence against economic strangulation. America believed it was defending China against Japanese aggression and upholding international principles against military conquest. This mutual perception of being on the defensive, what historians call the security dilemma, makes the Pacific War a classic tragedy in international relations. Each side's attempts to enhance its own security threatened the other, creating a spiral of hostility neither initially wanted. The Security Dilemma and the Pacific War, a tragic clash. The legacy of Pearl Harbor continues to shape our world today. The attack not only launched America into World War II, but fundamentally transformed how Americans view their country's role in global affairs. Before Pearl Harbor, American foreign policy was dominated by isolationism, the belief that America should avoid entanglement in foreign conflicts. The shock of the attack shattered this worldview. As historian John Dower notes, Pearl Harbor destroyed isolationism as a viable political position in American life. The war that followed created what we now call the American Century, a period of unprecedented American global influence, military power, and economic dominance. The massive industrial mobilization that defeated Japan and Germany transformed America's economy. The overseas bases established during the Pacific Campaign became the foundation for America's global military presence that continues today. For Japan, the consequences were equally profound but far more painful. The war it launched at Pearl Harbor ended with Japan in ruins, its cities destroyed, economy shattered, and nearly 3 million Japanese dead. American occupation forces fundamentally reshaped Japanese society, imposing a new constitution that renounced war and transforming Japan's political and economic systems. Yet from these ashes emerged one of history's most remarkable reconciliations. Within a generation, former bitter enemies became close allies. American investment helped rebuild Japan's economy, which would emerge by the 1980s as the world's second largest. The security alliance between Japan and America became the cornerstone of stability in the Asia-Pacific region. This transformation from enemies to allies illustrates the war's complexity and the inadequacy of simple moral narratives. Neither Japan nor America emerged from the Pacific War with clean hands. Japan's brutal occupation of China and Southeast Asia caused immense suffering. America's firebombing of Japanese cities and use of atomic weapons remain morally contested to this day. Understanding Pearl Harbor's full context doesn't excuse Japan's aggression, but helps explain why Japanese leaders felt war was their only option. Similarly, recognizing America's role in creating the conditions for war doesn't diminish the horror of Pearl Harbor or justify Japan's subsequent atrocities throughout Asia. The Security Dilemma and the Pacific War, a tragic clash. The most valuable lesson of Pearl Harbor may be understanding how great powers can stumble into devastating conflicts neither truly wants. The road to war was paved with miscalculation, cultural misunderstanding, and the dangerous belief on both sides that the other would back down if sufficiently pressured. Economic warfare, specifically America's oil embargo, proved as dangerous as military action in precipitating conflict. As nations today consider economic sanctions as alternatives to military intervention, Pearl Harbor offers a cautionary tale about the potential for such measures to provoke rather than prevent war. The failure of diplomacy before Pearl Harbor also holds critical lessons. American and Japanese diplomats spent months talking past each other, neither fully grasping the other's non-negotiable positions or internal constraints. Effective diplomacy requires understanding not just what the other side says, but why they say it. The cultural, historical, and domestic political factors that shape their positions. Perhaps most importantly, Pearl Harbor reveals the dangers of dehumanizing other nations. American policymakers often viewed the Japanese through racist and Orientalist lenses, assuming they would behave according to American expectations despite vast cultural differences. Japanese leaders similarly misunderstood American character, dismissing Americans as decadent materialists who would quickly lose heart in a difficult fight. These mutual misperceptions made conflict more likely and compromise more difficult. They created a situation where each side believed victory would be easier and quicker than it proved to be, lowering the perceived cost of war and raising the threshold for peaceful resolution. The security dilemma and the Pacific War, a tragic clash. As we reflect on Pearl Harbor today, it's worth considering the parallels to contemporary tensions in the Asia-Pacific. Once again, a rising Asian power, China, finds itself increasingly at odds with American dominance. Once again, territorial disputes, economic competition, and profound cultural differences complicate relations between Pacific powers. The essential resource that drove Japan to war in 1941, oil, remains central to geopolitical calculations throughout the region. The South China Sea, contested by multiple nations including China, contains crucial shipping lanes through which much of Asia's oil supply flows. Control of these waters represents today what control of the Dutch East Indies represented to Japan in 1941: energy security and economic survival. Modern Japan, now America's closest Asian ally, watches China's rise with unmistakable anxiety, conscious of how its own imperial expansion triggered devastating consequences. South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam, and other nations balance carefully between Chinese economic influence and American security guarantees, much as smaller Asian nations once navigated between Japanese and Western power. However, crucial differences exist between 1941 and today that make direct parallels problematic. China, unlike Imperial Japan, possesses nuclear weapons, creating a deterrent ceiling on conflict escalation. The global economy is far more integrated, raising the economic costs of major power war to potentially prohibitive levels. And both American and Chinese leaders are acutely aware of how catastrophic a Pacific conflict would be, awareness partly created by the legacy of Pearl Harbor itself. The question that haunts both historical analysis of Pearl Harbor and contemporary strategic planning is whether great power wars are ever truly inevitable. Did Japan and America have to fight? Do rising and established powers always collide violently, as some theories of international relations suggest? The historical evidence suggests that while the Pacific War became increasingly probable as Japanese-American relations deteriorated through 1941, specific decision points existed where different choices might have averted catastrophe. The oil embargo, the Hull Note, Japan's decision to advance into Southeast Asia rather than accept economic constraints, each represented a fork in the road where alternative paths existed, even if they were politically difficult. This perspective offers both caution and hope for contemporary international relations. Caution, because it reveals how seemingly rational decisions can lead incrementally toward disaster. Hope, because it suggests that even severe international crises need not end in war if leaders on both sides maintain flexibility, empathy, and a willingness to accept imperfect compromises. The security dilemma and the Pacific War, a tragic clash. Let's return one final time to that Sunday morning in December 1941. As Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, two proud nations with fundamentally different worldviews, political systems, and strategic objectives began a war that would transform them both. For Japanese leaders, the attack represented a desperate gamble to secure their nation's place as an independent power in a world they viewed as hostile to their ambitions. For American leaders, Pearl Harbor became the catalyst that would launch the United States into global leadership it maintains to this day. Neither side fully anticipated the consequences, of the fateful decisions that brought them into conflict. Japan could not foresee that its attack would unleash American industrial might that would reduce Japanese cities to ashes. America could not anticipate that victory over Japan would lead directly to Cold War confrontation with the Soviet Union and decades of global military commitments. The shocking images of the USS Arizona exploding, of American sailors trapped in sinking battleships, of smoke billowing over the once peaceful harbor. These have become etched in American national memory as symbols of treachery and resolve. But understanding why Japan attacked requires looking beyond these powerful images to the complex historical forces that propelled both nations toward collision. Oil and resources were certainly central to Japan's calculations. The American embargo threatened Japan's very existence as a modern industrial nation and naval power. But beneath the material factors lay deeper issues of status, respect, and competing visions for Asia's future. Japan, in 1941, saw itself as Asia's natural leader, destined to liberate the region from Western colonialism and create a co-prosperity sphere under Japanese guidance. That this vision was corrupted by military brutality and exploitation does not change the fact that many Japanese genuinely believed they were fighting to free Asia from Western domination. America, meanwhile, envisioned a post-war order built on free trade, self-determination, and international cooperation, principles enshrined in the Atlantic Charter that Roosevelt and Churchill signed just months before Pearl Harbor. That America's implementation of these principles was imperfect and often contradictory does not diminish their powerful appeal as an alternative to fascist and imperial models. These competing visions, Japan's new order in East Asia versus America's liberal internationalist vision, ultimately made compromise elusive. Neither side could fully accept the other's core aspirations without abandoning its own identity and perceived vital interests. So was Pearl Harbor about oil? Yes, fundamentally. Without the oil embargo, Japan would have had no immediate need to risk war with America. But it was also about much more, about how nations perceived themselves and others, about the clash between rising and established powers, about the tragic consequences when diplomacy fails and miscalculation prevails. As ordinary Americans went about their Sunday routines on December 7, 1941, and Japanese pilots steeled themselves for their historic mission, both peoples stood at the threshold of a new world neither fully comprehended. The bombs that fell on Pearl Harbor would echo not just across the Pacific, but across generations, shaping our world in ways still unfolding today. The ultimate tragedy of Pearl Harbor is that it didn't have to happen. Different choices, greater empathy, more flexible diplomacy, and clearer communication might have averted the Pacific War. This sobering realization should guide contemporary leaders navigating our own era's dangerous international waters. For viewers today, especially Americans who have grown up with simplified narratives of Pearl Harbor as unprovoked treachery, understanding the attack's full context offers a more complex but ultimately more valuable historical lesson. It reveals how nations can wind up in conflicts that serve neither's true interests, how the road to war is paved with miscalculation rather than malevolence, and how economic weapons can sometimes be as dangerous as military ones. December 7, 1941 remains a date that lives in infamy. But by understanding why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the real reasons behind the decision that changed history, we gain insights not just into our past, but into the dangerous dynamics that continue to shape international relations today. As tensions rise in the South China Sea, as economic sanctions become increasingly common tools of statecraft, as rising and established powers again eye each other warily across the Pacific, the lessons of Pearl Harbor have never been more relevant. The greatest tribute we can pay to those who died that Sunday morning is to ensure that the tragic spiral that led to their sacrifice is never repeated. In the final analysis, Pearl Harbor reminds us of humanity's dual capacity for both tragic miscalculation and remarkable reconciliation. The same nations that fought so bitterly across the Pacific would, within a generation, build one of history's most successful alliances. This transformation from enmity to friendship offers perhaps the most hopeful lesson from Pearl Harbor's dark chapter, that even the most bitter conflicts can, with wisdom and compassion, eventually give way to lasting peace. The Security Dilemma and the Pacific War, a tragic clash. Thank you for watching The Real Reason Japan Attacked Pearl Harbor, the shocking truth behind the Pacific War. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's pivotal moments, please consider subscribing to our channel for more explorations of Japan's fascinating history and culture. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with others who might appreciate this more nuanced understanding of history. Your support helps us continue creating content that bridges cultural understanding between Japan and America. Until next time, sayonara!